Welcome to the Widowed Mom Podcast, episode 276, Widows Unfiltered, an interview with Helen Tanner.
Welcome to the Widowed Mom Podcast, the only podcast that offers a proven process to help you work through your grief, to grow, evolve, and create a future you can truly look forward to. Here's your host, Master Certified Life Coach, Grief Expert, Widow, and Mom, Krista St-Germain.
Hey there, welcome to another episode of the podcast. So I just finished my interview with Helen, and I think I only cried twice. So I think that's a success. It really is so awesome to have a job that you love so much that it makes you want to cry tears of joy when you talk to the people that you work with. And I am so grateful to have that. And I'm grateful to my past self who created it for me, who did a lot of hard work to get me here so that I have an amazing job that makes a difference in the world where I get to help people and feel amazing about it. And so, yeah, just want to say that. And then I'll tell you before we jump into the interview that tomorrow is the last day to qualify for early bird pricing if you plan to join Grief Essentials. Grief Essentials, again, is my 8-week program. This is only the second time we've run it, and it is for those who want early grief to be easier. We can't make grief easy, but we can make it easier if we have the right tools and we have the right community. And that's what Grief Essentials is for. And we start September 17th, and tomorrow is the last day to take advantage of the early bird pricing. So you can go to coachingwithkrista.com/grief essentials and find out about it there. All right. And with that, let's jump into my interview with Helen. Enjoy. All right. Welcome, Helen. Glad to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. It's exciting to be here.
I can't believe that where you are, it's 7:00 in the morning, and where I am, it's 4:00 at night. We got on this call and you were like, "Good morning." And I was like, last call of the day.
I know. It's weird.
It's so weird. So as opposed to me introducing you, why don't you just tell the listeners a little bit about Helen? Whatever you want us to know. Yeah.
Sure. Well, I'm 45. I was widowed 18 months ago when I was 43. I have 2 boys. They are now 6 and 8. They're currently downstairs watching TV. I work as a doctor, almost full time. So I juggle that with the 2 children. Philip was a doctor as well. We met at the hospital back in New Zealand. We're both New Zealanders. We moved to Australia about 10 years ago. He died unexpectedly after a 2-week short, horrible illness where nobody knew what was wrong with him. He went to hospital with headaches and kept having strokes, and it was all very confusing. And then they took him for an operation to find out a bit more about what was wrong with him. He woke up from that fine. I went to see him, and then he died in front of me about 45 minutes later. And even now when I'm trying to say it, it's still, my chest is tightening up. It was horrible. It was horrific. 2023 was going to be a great year for us. He had just opened a private practice. He'd been building towards that for 6 years. I had just finished my PhD, and I'd been doing that for 7 years, and our youngest child was about to start school. And so we were really excited about 2023, and then he died. And then the dream just ended. The pathway was gone. I like to think that we think we're on a pathway, and then suddenly it just disappeared.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so now it's the 3 of us.
Mm-hmm.
And for the first 6 months of 2023, it was horrible, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
It was brutal. But I would say I'm in a good place now. I'm back at work. My kids are happy. We have our moments, as I will always have my moments, because this grief thing is a life thing, which I've learned to accept. But I am actually genuinely happy now. And I did not think I ever would be, ever again.
I love that for you. I want to learn more about what it was like because you said the first 6 months were so unbearable.
Hmm.
What was it like? And in particular, what was it like compared to what you had expected it might be like?
Yeah, so I had often wondered what it would be like if Phil died or one of my kids died, because I think sometimes we ponder that. And I'd always thought about it from a practical perspective, as in what it would be like to be a solo parent. I never, ever, ever thought about the pain of grief. And
Mm.
so that was the bit that threw me. And I don't think you can imagine it. I just don't think you can. I mean, my father died many years ago, and I lost a friend many years ago to suicide, and they were horrible. Losing a spouse was another level. And
Yeah.
I think, yeah, for me, it was losing that person who was in my life every day, who I spoke to every day, and who was just a part of me and what I did. And then suddenly they were gone.
How
Yeah.
would you have described your relationship with emotions prior to his death? Because it's
Emotion.
it's
Yeah.
been my experience, and I want to hear your experience, but it's been my experience that everyone I talk to who is in the healthcare field, a giving profession, there seems to be a lot of consistency in that they're taught to put their own emotions and kind of bury them for
Hmm.
as a way to cope. Yeah, what was
Hmm.
that? What was your relationship with emotions like before?
100% like that.
Yeah.
I lived in a really narrow band. I was never either, I was never comfortable being very happy or very sad. I remember crying in my entire relationship with Phil. I might have cried 3 times in 10 years. And my
Wow.
dad died. I really,
Yeah.
and I had 4 miscarriages, and I don't think I cried with any of those. I just didn't. And I had a very much carry on attitude. I'm not going to let this bother me. I'm just going to move on.
Mm-hmm.
And so when Phil died, I couldn't do that because it was way too much. And
Mm-hmm.
so the emotions just smacked me and were overwhelming. And I did cry a lot and still do.
Mm-hmm.
And even now, though, I think you're crying. It's been 18 months. You know, there's still that little voice inside of me that says, "What are you doing?"
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I very, very rarely cry in front of other people. It's very unusual.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. I must be very comfortable with someone to cry in front of them.
Yeah. Okay. So for all of you who want to be Helen's
Yeah,
friend,
take it as a
if she cries in
compliment.
front of
Yeah.
you, that means she's comfortable.
She really
Yeah.
likes you.
What
Yeah.
what do you attribute that to? Was it what you were taught in your professional schooling? Is it what was role modeled to you as a child? A combination? Something else?
I suspect a combination. Um, and maybe that's the Australian New Zealand way, is we don't
Is it?
show a lot of emotions. No, not really. Especially growing up in the 80s, we didn't.
Mhm.
I don't remember seeing my mother cry once when my dad died.
Mm. Wow.
Um, yeah, just not to say she
Yeah.
wasn't unbelievably sad, but it just outward displays of emotion didn't really happen.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
then when you add the workplace on top of that, and I deal with death at work all the time, and so I have learned to compartmentalize that.
Yeah. Since you said it was when he died, it was overwhelming and what used to work for you didn't.
Mm-hmm.
How did you cope with it? What changes did you make so that you could deal with the overwhelming emotion?
What did I? I'm trying to think if I did anything consciously. I stopped working. I couldn't work at that point, and I actually did allow myself to fall apart
Hmm.
emotionally. I didn't stop the emotions. I read a book by Megan Devine, who you
Hmm.
might know, called "Yeah, It's Okay to Not Be Okay" or something
Hmm.
like that.
Yeah. It's okay
And
if you're
and
not
that
okay.
helped. It's not, yeah. I think once I allowed myself to not be okay, that helped me. And I surrounded myself by people who were comfortable with my pain.
Hmm.
And it took a while to work out who those people were. And they weren't necessarily my good friends beforehand. And I know
Yeah.
this is a common story, but it surprised me. The people who were my good friends weren't necessarily there. And yet people who I'd literally just met became such a support for me
Mm-hmm.
and for my
Yeah.
boys, and still are.
Does
Some people are comfortable and some people aren't.
when you were going through it and the people who, you know, were there for you were surprising and vice versa, did you ever take that personally, or could you just tell
No.
it was about them and not you?
Well, a combination. It's very difficult to remember that part of my life.
Yeah.
Um, but I do remember I went to hug a friend. This would have been days after Philip died, and she ran away and said,
Oh,
I just can't do this." And I remember thinking, "Oh, it's not okay for me to cry."
wow.
Like,
Yeah. Way to
yeah,
reinforce that narrative that you already
yeah,
had.
yeah, exactly. And then another friend was here with her husband, and her husband said something, and I cried, and she
Hmm.
told him off for making me cry. And again, it was reinforcing that.
There's the message. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a
Crying is.
message. Don't cry. Crying is bad. Whereas he said something nice, and I cried. I cried because
Hmm.
Philip was dead.
Yeah.
And
And you're
yeah,
human in grief, and
we're
crying
human.
is what humans do.
Yeah, who
Yeah.
knew?
Yeah.
Uh, the more difficult emotion was not actually mine. It was my youngest son, Eddie,
Mm.
because he was 4 when Philip died, and it took him a long time to process it. And he started school 3 weeks after Phil died, and that's a big step for any kid,
Hmm.
let alone someone whose dad's just died. A week after that, he had a heart procedure at the hospital, which failed. And so he had to go into the hospital, have an operation like his dad did. Uh, and, and looking back on that, I don't know how I did that 4 weeks later. After having watched Philip die after an operation, I had to take Eddie in for an operation and it didn't work. And so after that, I mean, that is when the three of us crashed, really, I would say. And Eddie got angry. He got so angry. He went from being a beautiful, sweet, loving kid to punching everybody in his class
Hmm.
and teachers. And I was constantly being called by the school principal because he'd punch somebody else and he would yell at people at the supermarket. And parents would stare at me like I wasn't able to control my children
Hmm.
because it wasn't okay. And it was put to me like it was a bad thing that he was doing this. I didn't see it that way myself. I saw it as a reaction to what had happened to him in his life. Because in his world, his life had just completely blown up.
Thank goodness
Um,
that's the way that you saw it. I can only imagine if you had bought into the stories that other people had about him being angry and acting out on that anger.
yeah, yeah. I'm glad I did too, and I don't know where that understanding of mine came from. Um, but I allowed him to be as angry as he needed to be. It
Hmm.
was tough because he would show that physically by hitting people and hitting me a lot too. And I would mostly allow that until it got too much. And that went on for so long because because the first operation failed, he then had to have another much more major one, which was in November last year. And he had that hanging over his head the entire year.
Mm.
And he thought he would die from that. And there was
Oh,
a chance he
at
would,
4.
he would die from that. There was you know, not a high chance, but there was a 1 in 50 chance he would. So that was hanging over his head and mine. And
Mhm.
so he was mad for a long period of time. He didn't settle in that regard until this year. And now
What
underneath
changed?
that, we have sadness. Hmm?
Yes. Yes.
What
That makes
changed?
sense.
I think surviving his heart operation is what changed
Hmm.
for him.
What was
And
the switch that you saw? How did you know it moved from anger to sadness?
I could just see a calming in his face. He stopped hitting. He hasn't hit anybody at school for about 3 months, which is a major achievement.
Hmm.
He is sad, and he will come and say to me, "I'm sad, Mum," which is beautiful for
It's
somebody of his
yes.
age.
Yes.
He's so emotionally like together now. Um, and yeah, it's beautiful, and I'll cry because
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And I look at my kids and how they handle emotions now, and I think it's amazing. Yeah.
Well, their mom might have had something to do with that.
Thanks. I mean, yes, and the mum goes on did
Yeah.
majorly because I allowed them and I allowed their emotions and whatever they
Mhm.
needed, I allowed it. And so they are, I think, better people from an emotional perspective because of all this and because of mum goes on than they would have been otherwise. And that is a hard thing for me to admit that there is something good that's come out of
Mm-hmm.
Philip's death because that feels weird,
Yeah, I
you
get
know?
that. I
Yeah,
get that. Yeah.
but it's
It's
true.
almost
It's
like
true.
it's almost like, at least for me, it was like this. I don't know what it's like for you, but for me, it was like if I say that something good has come out of it, that in some form or fashion, I feel like that's equivalent to me saying that I wanted it to happen when I absolutely did not want it
Hmm.
to happen and would change it in a heartbeat.
Hmm. 100%.
Yeah.
100%. 100%. And and also I've changed so much and I like who I am now more than I was before.
Mm-hmm.
And that is also very difficult for me to handle. And
Yes.
I wish I could be the person I am now in the relationship with Phil because I think it would be a better relationship,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not possible because I'm
I
only this way because he's dead.
no, it wasn't that long ago. I was having a conversation with some coach friends in a mastermind, and we were talking about, what everybody, these are not coaches that coach grief. That's kind of my thing, not their thing. But we were talking about what it looks like to go from typically, where someone starts versus where they want to be. And in grief, um, how it can seem like from the outside that it's just going to be this champion, rah, rah, hero journey
Mhm.
kind of thing. And really, the more common experience is a lot of what you just articulated, which is, yeah, like you might make some changes that feel like growth to you, but then that brings more grief because what if you had
Mhm.
been this
Mhm.
person in that relationship and then
Yeah.
your person missed out on that version of you, and then you're celebrating progress with your kids and it's amazing, but then also it's like, why did it have to be that got us here? And so it's just like this whole, it seems like it
Yes.
would be this linear progression that is full of mostly, I don't know, feel good things, but it's a
Hmm.
lot more of like exposing growth, but then exposing grief
Hmm.
related to the growth.
100%. And the good stuff comes with all of that complicated stuff.
Yeah.
And so I think people look at me and think she's doing really well. I had someone come up to me at school recently, a school mom, and say, "I heard you're all better now." And I,
Is that so?
yeah, like it was the flu. But I think,
Oh dear.
I think people think, if you're back at work and you look out really happy and you've brushed your hair, then everything's good. And what they don't realize is all that other stuff underneath is that when you are having good times, they can be equally as difficult and complicated as the bad times.
Yes. And I'm curious, did she say that in jest or was she serious?
No, dead
I
serious.
hear you're all better now.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I've
And
written these
nobody ever
things
said it
down.
quite that way to me. That is a pretty bold way of saying it, but I do think it is really relatable
Mm-hmm.
because we get why they say complimentary things, but then also it doesn't match our internal experience.
Mm-hmm.
How they perceive
Mm-hmm.
us is not what we're actually experiencing on the inside at all.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when you're further down the track, it's all much more hidden.
Yeah,
They
for
can't
sure.
see it unless they really, really know you.
Yeah. Yeah. And even
Yeah,
then, so
even
depending
then.
on how good at being chameleons we are, we might not show it to them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And like the same thing, the concept of repartnering has been one that's been really interesting for me,
Hmm.
because people have said to me, "Oh, you will have to repartner."
Nope.
Okay, good to know. And they will. These are people I don't even know very well, and I I've had the combination of that, and also a combination of, oh, you could never end up with anyone again. Or my favorite was actually, it's going to be really hard for any guy to like you because of all the baggage you now have. That was a great one.
Ah,
Yeah, I know. So I get that,
people.
and people, and then the you must repartner because you can't be alone.
Heaven
And
forbid.
I
Thank you,
know, goodness, right? And
patriarchy.
exactly. And what those people don't understand is that repartnering is the same as what we're talking about. It's so complex.
Sure.
I haven't done it, but it would bring back all that. I'm a better partner with this person than I was with Phil, and all that stuff. And so none of that stuff is straightforward. And again, I think people think once you get to that point, you're all better. But this
Yeah,
is a
and
lifelong journey.
there's so much in a statement like that that you have to repartner, right? There's so
Mm,
many assumptions about
yeah,
what
do what?
being happy as a woman and raising your ability
Mhm,
to raise children. Like, yeah, there's a
mhm,
lot there.
mhm.
And as though that repartnering would be a solution to
Exactly.
what
Yeah,
again?
yeah, exactly. That is the solution.
Yeah. As someone who has repartnered, I will tell you, and podcast listeners already know this. I know you probably do too. But yeah, it's messy and complicated. And
Mhm, mhm.
you really got to be able to hold the and.
Yes. And I listened to your episode about this recently, about the and.
Hmm.
And it's
Yeah.
the and is amazing.
And
I
hold.
can feel butterflies for you and also
Hmm.
miss the stability of my late husband.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've had all these wild dreams kind of lately too. And it's been 8 years since Hugo died. But I've had all of these wild dreams about finding out that he didn't actually die, that
Mm.
he just left me and
Uh-huh.
and pretended he died.
Ah,
The wildest thing.
weird.
And it'll be
Okay.
like, I'm in the relationship and then I find out he didn't actually die. And then how do I not?
Oh no.
It's like what problems is my subconscious trying to solve? I don't know. Anyway,
Oh,
yeah,
the
complicated.
subconscious is very judgmental.
It's it's wild in there sometimes.
Yeah,
I don't know what
yeah.
we're doing in there.
I don't
So
know.
at what point did you come across my work? Was it the podcast? How did our paths cross? How did we meet?
Um, After Philip died, I joined Facebook. I
Uh-huh.
was a late
You
joiner
weren't
at
even on Facebook
43.
until he died?
I had been and I had come off because I wanted to
Oh,
stop social media, and then I came back
smart
after he
woman.
died. Yeah. And joined a lot of widow support groups.
Mm-hmm.
There are some great widow support groups in Australia and around the
Mm-hmm.
world. And then I saw an ad for you that probably popped up because those are the groups that I had joined.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so I saw your lovely smiling face.
Oh.
And yeah, and listened to a podcast and thought, yeah, I want to do this. I sent your details to my sister-in-law, and she thought you were great too.
Oh.
And then I remember I have two brothers, one's in Seattle and one's in Denver. Um, the one in Seattle, I talked to him and he said, Helen, if there was ever a problem to throw your resources at, this is it. Which was very smart because we tend to think we wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
use our resources for this kind of thing because you're spending money on yourself and
Mm-hmm.
it feels strange. But he was the one who said, no, you must do it. And
What a lovely family you must have if
I'm
those are the
too.
kinds of conversations that you're having with them.
Yeah, look, I do. I'm very lucky. I called my brother and sister-in-law, oh, sometimes every day in the acute
Wow.
grief. Yeah, FaceTime. And it didn't matter that they were on the other side of the world. It just didn't matter,
Mm-hmm.
you know, such as the way technology is. And yeah, they have come through this with me.
I
Yeah.
love it.
And they adored Philip as well. And we had just been in America visiting my family when Philip got sick.
Mm.
So they had just
Mm-hmm.
seen him.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that is how I found you, was on Facebook. And it's strange. Like I just knew it was the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
I knew it's what I needed to do. And this has happened
Mm-hmm.
to me a lot since Philip died, is that I would just get this deep knowing, maybe it's intuition, I don't know, but something says to me, you have to do that.
Mm-hmm. I love it.
I don't know,
From
maybe it's him, from a
mm-hmm.
spiritual sense. I don't know. But every time that has happened, it has been the best decision.
Amazing.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, call it what you want to call it, right? I don't think it matters
Yeah,
as long as you
exactly.
listen to it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I started in June, which I had thought was too early, but I don't think it was. I was coming out of acute grief and I was marching straight into the grief plateau.
Mm-hmm. What made you think it
And
was too early? That it was like a
mm,
calendar thing or a
yeah, it was a
yeah,
calendar thing. Yeah,
yeah.
it was a judgmental thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but within a month, I was very different. I remember my brother called me um, to chat. This is a month after that started, and then he started to cry because he said, "You're back."
Oh,
I know, I know. So sweet.
that's
So sweet.
amazing.
I know. He was so overwhelmed because I was back. Yeah.
You know what's wild to me about that is like when we hopped on the Zoom before we hit record and we were talking about like nice to see you because we don't really see each other on Zoom
hmm
because pretty
hmm
much all of the coaching that we've done has been in the online community in
hmm
writing. Like you
hmm
post something, I respond and we go back and
hmm
forth and back and forth, but because of the time
hmm
zone difference,
hmm
I'm you're never really on live calls. So
No.
like in 1 month
Mm.
without us really having been on calls together, that's
hmm
really cool to hear.
Yeah, I joined my first call maybe 6 months into it
That's wild.
because I decided I would get up early. But yeah, so it was all online coaching. And what did it for there were two things that did it for me. One was allowing the emotions, and getting rid of I can't remember the word, but the secondary judgment, the dirty pain.
Yeah.
Like,
Suffering, dirty
yeah,
pain. Hmm.
suffering dirty pain if I'm sad and
Yeah.
then judging the sadness. I still have that default, but I'm aware of it now. So that helped. And then realizing that I could change my thoughts. So my biggest problem of thoughts were my life will never be as good again, and my children's lives will never be as good again,
Hmm.
which are very common thoughts.
Yeah.
And then with you, I realized that they are thoughts. They're not facts.
How did it
That
feel
blew
to realize
that
that?
blew my
Yeah.
mind. It
Yeah.
blew my mind. And it didn't it didn't take long for me to go, they're thoughts. They're not real. Like as soon as I got the reply from you, that pretty much was it.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. That honestly,
It
that's what I've noticed in a lot of our coaching that we've done is it doesn't seem to take a whole lot of exchanges back and forth. Sometimes I even
no.
only have to ask you a couple of questions. And then
hmm
and then maybe part of that is the time zone like I'll post
hmm
in the in
hmm
my evening
hmm
and then I don't see your reply until the morning, but
hmm
then you just seem to be like, "Okay, yep, that's what I needed to hear. Got it. Check."
Yeah, I agree. And maybe that's because I have that 24 hours to think on it.
Mhm.
Whereas if we were doing a live coaching, that wouldn't be the case.
Yeah.
But you ask the right question. You ask the questions that really break down what I'm thinking. And then I realize that I'm just thinking it and it's not the truth.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
And if
and then
I
all your power's back.
all my power's back, yeah. And it's always the same thing. It's the same thing dressed up as a different problem.
Mhm. Mhm.
Usually it is. And yeah. Yeah.
Amazing.
So I
Had you ever
sorry.
had a coach before or done any coaching before?
Yeah, I had actually. Because I became a director, like it went into management as a doctor very quite young. I was 37. And that was a case of no one else wanted to do it. And I was the last person standing, so I did it.
Okay.
Yeah, because those jobs are tough. They
Uh-huh.
are tough. And so I got a management coach for that. And really, a management coach is a life coach
Hmm.
because being a manager is about managing your own emotions and emotions of other people and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I had that for many years, actually. Yeah. So maybe
Amazing.
that's why it clicked a little quicker than I had expected. I don't know. I don't know.
I'm just glad it clicked. I don't know
Mhm.
either. What made you
Mm-mm.
stick around and decide to do masters?
Um, because I don't want to let go yet.
Yeah.
I never want to let go because there's always something. There's always something to learn. And
Hmm.
I've come to realize this grief thing is never going away. It's gonna turn up in different ways.
Yeah.
And you might notice I can go, I don't know, 2 months without messaging you
Hmm.
or asking for coaching. And then
Yeah.
boom, there'll be
There you
something.
are.
There I am. And it's generally something I feel big, like, I can't deal with patients dying at work anymore,
Hmm.
that kind of thing. And then we'll talk about that and I'll get through that. And I get so much out of it. And even though I'm not around as much on the Slack, I'm still getting stuff from it. And every
Yeah.
time I listen to a coaching call, I think, oh, this is me. Because
Yeah.
we're all going through the same things.
I think there's a
Mm.
lot of women like that,
Hmm.
that especially are in masters or continuation, right? They keep hearing themselves, they keep seeing value, they use it
Hmm.
as much
Hmm.
as it's helpful to them. But yeah.
Mm. I
I'm
think it's
switching
brilliant.
gears a little bit, but I'm curious to know, since you are a doctor, what did
Mhm.
your formal training with regard to grief
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
bereavement, maybe specifically? What was it? No,
Mm.
there's a head
There's a
shaking.
shake of the
Okay.
head. Yeah, what formal training? I don't remember any.
It never
Actually, do
even
I
got
remember
discussed.
any? Ooh, no, it would have. It would have. It would have. Breaking bad news is discussed. How
Uh-huh.
to tell
Okay.
someone that their loved one is
Yeah.
dying is just, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How, yeah, and that would be all I remember. There was nothing about how to manage your own emotions when
Mm-hmm.
patients die. No, I don't remember that. That's changing though.
Good.
Yeah, it's changing. I mean, I trained maybe 15 years ago, maybe longer, Krista, because I'm
Mm-hmm.
older than that now, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And things have changed a great deal in that time. Yeah.
But I think
Yeah.
that's so good for people to be reminded of too, that, you know, grace and compassion for all, right? Even people who we might think have been trained as it relates to grief may not have been. It really is a rather pervasive challenge. So grace and
Hmm.
compassion to your healthcare providers as well as,
Thanks.
yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And yeah, even when Philip died, I think the hospital didn't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because he worked there and I worked there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then we have the two little children, and he died at a hospital where so most people in hospital who die are not his age. They're not in their 40s
Mm-hmm.
usually. Not when it's a medical illness, usually. Well, it's either that it's something that people know about and you go down the palliative plan and we know what's happening. With him, it was just so unusual,
Mm.
that it really threw the stuff. And that I look back now and I think I got no support. I had the world's best, loveliest doctors, and I could see it broke them
Mm.
having one, because he was one of their colleagues and he was dead, and I was one of their colleagues too. And I still remember their faces when they told me he was dead. It was
Mm.
just, one of them couldn't look at me. She was too upset. Um, but after we left that hospital, after he had died and it was over, there was nothing. There wasn't, this is a support group, this is a pack, this is what you might need.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. Nothing. Just, yeah, totally on my own to figure it out.
And was that what it was like to work there too? I mean, I'm
Hmm.
assuming if they weren't
Yes.
giving you support, then they probably also weren't giving their team support. Yeah.
Well, I think they had a lot of debriefs actually after Philip died
Mm.
because it was so traumatic from so many of the staff. And I got emails about those debriefs because I was on the email system because I worked there.
That's got to be weird.
It was really weird. Well, just emails saying that they are having these debriefs and this is what's happening.
Mm,
Not the details so much, but for me, there was nothing, no. And in all hospitals, that's actually the way it is. As soon as someone's dead and the family leaves the hospital, there's no contact with them again.
mm-hmm. What was it
Mm.
like to go back?
I work at two hospitals. The main, it's very different from the US system, but I work at the main sort of public government one, which is our big Virgins and hospitals. And then the one
Mm-hmm.
Philip died at was a smaller private one. I have not been able to go back to any area that he was in. I
Mm-hmm.
start walking towards the lifts near where he was, and I can't go any further.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't work there very much anymore.
Okay. So
Um,
you really
yeah,
didn't have to expose yourself to the
no, but
awkwardness and emotion.
yeah. So I stay in one small area of the hospital and don't move out. In terms of the big hospital, I have had to go back into um, areas of the hospital that are similar to where Philip died,
Mm-hmm.
like the post-operative area, and I find
Mm-hmm.
that incredibly challenging
Yeah.
because everybody is a 43-year-old man with two children, 4 and 7.
Right.
It just
Yeah.
comes back. I'm working on it.
Yep. Yep.
Yep.
I hear you. One of the things that I, for better or worse, was kind of grateful for is that, um, well, two things really. You know, Hugo and I work together at the same company too. And
Hmm.
so going back, it kind of made me kind of
Hmm.
navigate that, but it felt like a helpful thing, not a hurtful thing. It didn't feel like I was re-traumatizing myself. It actually felt kind of helpful. Whereas I don't
Hmm.
think that's quite the experience you're having because he didn't die where we worked, right? We just worked there
Yeah.
together, but there
Hmm.
was nothing traumatic associated with that place. Um, but also one of the things that weirdly did help is that the place on the highway where the accident happened is really not a place I can avoid driving by. I mean, I would have to
Hmm.
take great lengths to not go by that particular spot because it's really a main thoroughfare. And it's not somewhere that it's like in my regular daily commute or anything, but you know, a few times a
Hmm.
year I'm going to drive by there. And the ability to just like prepare myself for that, tap through it, like, you
Hmm.
know, kind of revisit it without actually pulling over on the side of the road and feeling the intensity of it, just like in baby steps, was somehow, I was kind of glad I had to do that. Anyway.
Yeah, and I think that's the way it needs to be. It's very small
Yeah.
steps.
Oh,
Yeah.
totally. And never forced,
Yeah.
right?
No.
Always and only to the extent that you choose it for yourself. And then noticing any judgment that might pop up if there is, right? About how much
Hmm.
time has passed and should we have and all of those things. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
What so I always like to know if if you could go back and tell your acute grief self
Hmm.
or even later if it feels right to
Hmm.
you, like some
Hmm.
advice, words of
Hmm.
wisdom, what would you tell
Hmm.
her?
I would tell her, and I don't know if she would listen, but I would still tell her.
She's a stubborn one.
She is a stubborn one.
Yeah.
Um, and I tell this to myself now, and I was telling it to myself yesterday. Oh,
Yeah.
um, it, stop trying to rush it.
Mm.
That's my big one. That is an issue for me.
Hmm.
Is I just want to push through, and I don't like to stop and allow the sadness now. Like, because I see it, this is going to sound terrible, but it's very honest. I see it
Hmm.
as a waste of time because I could be achieving something. I could be
Hmm.
cleaning the house or I could be playing games with the boys. And instead, I'm just sad. And what does
Hmm.
that achieve? That is where I go to all the time. I'm a very
Yeah.
achievement focused person. And so if I'm sad, that just gets in the way of achievements.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I would tell myself to just take time.
Hmm.
It's not a race.
Yeah.
Life is not a race.
Yeah.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
think that's a good thing for a lot of people to hear because
Yeah.
I I for sure The word I would use was probably not waste, but I think the word I used was like useless.
Yeah.
I'd
Yeah.
be like,
Useless.
what's the use in being angry? Like there's no value in it. There's no
Yeah,
use in it.
exactly.
But that's the same
Exactly.
thing I was, yeah, telling myself. Like it's a barrier too.
Mm. Um, the other thing that, and this comes back to that, but grief is not a bad thing, and grief's
Mm.
going to be with me forever. My
Hmm.
friend calls it her grief case, my other widowed
Yes,
friend.
I love that. A grief case.
It's
Just bring it
good.
along. Uh-huh.
And it's going to be with me forever. And I am changed. I'm a different person.
Hmm.
And that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and then one of the most profound things that you said was that I don't have to be both parents.
Hmm.
Because, wow, when he died, I thought, oh my goodness, Philip was the fun dad. You know, we all think
Mm.
the fun one died. I'm going to have to do everything. And there I was last night, took the boys out for dinner, special treat, came home, cleaned the house, get the school bags done, get them ready for school, preparing for school, told them to go upstairs, get into bed, read a book. And then by the time I got up there to say goodnight, they were both asleep. And then I started beating myself up for not having been up there to read to them and give them a hug goodnight, as well as do everything else that needed to be done.
Right.
So I still have that. And I need to remind myself that it's okay. It's okay not to be perfect. And I don't need to be
Hmm.
both parents because I can't be.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And I hope what people will hear from what you just said is that sometimes we recognize something that's unhelpful and we have, a huge jump in our awareness around that particular subject. And yet it still comes back, right? It's
Oh,
not a
it
one and
still.
done thing. Like we still have to
No.
we still have to keep reminding ourselves of this new thing we've chosen to believe.
Hmm. I think the difference now is that after a while, I go, hang on, hang on.
Hmm.
I know this thought. I recognize this one.
Yeah.
Whereas this time last year, I didn't recognize it as a thought. I
Uh-huh.
just thought I just thought I was a bad parent, and that was a fact.
Yeah.
It's now I,
I'm happy to inform you
yeah,
that that is
I'm
not a
not a bad
fact. It
parent.
is
Yeah,
just a
it's not a
thought.
fact. It's a thought. Yeah.
I love it. So
Um,
what's next for you?
what's next? One thing I'll say about life now is it's a little bit exciting.
Yeah.
Because I'm just going with wherever it takes me. Whereas before Philip died, I was on that treadmill that everybody else was on.
Hmm.
I was married, I had two kids, I had a job, I was doing everything I was supposed to do. And then I got thrown off multiple times. And now I just think, well, I'm just going to see what's going to come.
Hmm.
Um, so even being on this podcast I would never have imagined in my life that I would be on a podcast. Never, never.
And here
Like
you are.
I'm not an interesting person. So why would I be? And and
I
so it's
might put that
cool.
in the thought line, Helen. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I don't know about that one. But I see that it's cool.
Hmm.
Life is a little bit adventurous now. Um, I have started, I think I've mentioned this to you, writing a book. My I have a grief counselor and sort of trauma
Hmm.
person, and she had suggested that I write a book about everything that I went through and then all the weird stuff that has happened since Philip died.
Hmm.
The strangeness of the world, and yeah, yeah. Um,
Yeah.
the
How,
cool,
how does
fun
it
stuff.
feel to like think about having a book out in the world?
Scary.
Yeah.
Very scary. Yeah.
Hmm.
And again, I've never thought I would have a life that would be worthy of writing in a book. And part of me says, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Um, but why not?
Why
Why not?
not?
Why not? So I have started writing. I have a ghost writer to help me because I'm not a creative writer.
Hmm.
Um, and that experience is very fun and very cool. Even if it's nothing but that, it's still cool. It's just this entirely new world for me because it's nothing to do with medicine and being a doctor.
Hmm.
And it's all these things that I thought I could never do.
And
As
here you
in,
are proving
and here
yourself
I
wrong.
am. yeah, so then what's next? I don't know.
Which is really kind
And
of a beautiful thing. It sounds like it doesn't sound like it's
no, it doesn't like
scary.
it's exciting. It's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And I live with more intention now. I think about what I'm doing and what I want to do, as opposed to being on the treadmill of life.
Mm-hmm.
I came off that one. I don't like that anymore.
Yeah.
It wasn't serving me.
I think, yeah, that's sometimes when people were talking about post-traumatic growth and people think it has to be so big, and it it doesn't. But in a way it is, right? Getting off the treadmill, it doesn't seem big. And then in that it's not you going out and, you know, creating some massive movement. It's like you just making personal
Mm-hmm.
decisions about your life. But in terms of the impact that it's going to have on you and your life to live in a different way and to
Mm-hmm.
value different things because of the loss, like, God, it's so cool.
It's so cool. It's so cool. It's, the book Eat, Pray, Love, that has always made me
Mm-hmm.
think that you can only have growth after something bad happens by going overseas and going to an ashram and doing all those sorts of things. But that's not true. You
Not
can
true.
do that at home
Yeah.
with your own life. You don't need to go and do something major, just like what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's all about your internal thoughts.
For sure. Exactly. And how
Mhm,
cool is it? Like, I'm just thinking about how you were talking about how you never imagined yourself being on a podcast. I go
mm,
back a little bit and I think about how I never imagined myself being a coach. I
mhm,
never imagined myself being on my mentor's podcast.
mhm,
I never imagined having a podcast of my own. And then here we are in this
mhm,
beautiful replenishing cycle of I teach you, you teach your kids,
mhm,
you
mhm,
change yourself, you do something that impacts the world and it just spreads and spreads and spreads and
mhm,
spreads. And
mhm.
how amazing is it that we live in a world that we can do that, that we
I
can
know.
be in completely different parts of the world and
Mhm.
spread the same good stuff. Like it's wild.
It is wild. It's wild. And it's wild that this has happened because our spouses died as well. That,
Right.
yeah, like this is going to sound very odd, but Hugo's death has changed my life. And yet I never knew him. That blows my mind, you know?
Here's the
And
part where
that's
I
just,
will not cry. I'm
but,
like,
you know,
honestly, like that will continue to be my favorite part of this work is knowing that like your kids and who knows what else after that, your kids' life
mhm, mhm.
is
Yeah. And
different.
if their friends will be changed
Right.
because of my boys, when
And
yeah.
no, I was just gonna say, and yet we still wouldn't have asked for it to happen.
I know,
It
I
can all
know.
be true. Yeah.
And when my the friends of my boys are upset, my boys will go and sit with them and hug them. I know because they're just so comfortable
Mm-hmm.
with tears and sadness and anger or whatever emotion their friends are showing. It just does not faze them.
And we're gonna
Beautiful.
fast forward a few generations, and this is gonna be more normal. And we're going to
Yeah.
be less uncomfortable around grief. And we're going to be more comfortable with difficult feelings.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I
Thank you
think
for
so
being
too.
part of that.
No, thank you. It's
Is
been
there
amazing.
anything we didn't talk about that you wanted to talk about?
No, I don't think so. I could
Yeah.
talk forever.
You're the best.
You too.
Thank you for coming and sharing your story, Helen. I really appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Thank
All
you.
right. We'll talk soon.
Yeah. Bye.
If you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and want to create a future you can truly get excited about even after the loss of your spouse, I invite you to join my Mom Goes On coaching program. It's small group coaching just for widowed moms like you, where I'll help you figure out what's holding you back and give you the tools and support you need so you can move forward with confidence. Please don't settle for a new normal that's less than what you deserve. Go to coachingwithkrista.com and click Work With Me for details and next steps. I can't wait to meet you.